So I have a real keen understanding about mindset as it relates to money. When I was born or I grew up, my parents had a terrible mindset about money. And when I say that, they were both, I was probably upper lower class or lower middle class. My father worked, my mother stayed at home, was a stay-at-home mom. My dad was an auto mechanic, and then he became a computer programmer. And in my home, money was always an issue. So there was always fights about money, but the mantra of we can't afford that was something I heard almost on a daily basis. So we can't afford that. We can't afford that. Now, I don't know if that was my parents' inability to say no to me as a kid when I wanted certain things, or if we really couldn't afford things, although I did have this idea that we couldn't afford anything because we were, quote, poor. That really got inside of my head. And it was a limiting factor for me for many years. That I don't want to say it's a poverty mindset, but it was definitely a poor mentality that I can't afford things, I can't afford things, I can't afford things. And that comes in layers. So you have layers of this attitude. So for example, you say, oh, I can't afford a toy for your birthday, or you can't afford a toy. You do something good and your parent wants to give you a reward. You want a toy that's $5. They can only afford something that's $2. Then on top of that, you see the struggle for things like what's needed to day-to-day run the house. My father was always working on cars in the back to keep them running. So he'd have a car, he was always working on it. Instead of taking it to the mechanic, he would have a car up on blocks for weeks at a time, trying to stretch it out. And so I don't know how much of it was actually true financial hardship and how much of it was just the mindset that they had that they just don't have the money. But it really can get into your head when you're a young person, and it can limit you in what you think you're capable of and how you see the world. If you see the world as lack and limitation, you're not going to push yourself to have everything that you can possibly have or be everything you could possibly be. I definitely saw myself that way. In fact, talking about layers for a minute, I remember my sister and I would get little awards in elementary school and high school. My mother said she would feel a little guilty when we get these awards. This was afterwards. She didn't say it at the time, but I could always tell my mom there's something about her that she didn't quite feel right when we were getting honored or getting awards for things. So there was this idea that we don't deserve that. And that really did impact me. Now, I, at a relatively young age, realized that this was jacked up. And I came to the conclusion that I need to get out of here. This is wrong. They're 100% wrong about this. And I'm called for something better in my life. Like, I had a feeling that God really had a big plan for me. So I started understanding while I was on my own, and I had to change my mindset about money at a very young age. I remember the first time I think financially I realized my parents were jacked up was between 8 and 10 years old, maybe. And I was full bore, I'm getting the hell out of here by 13, 14. And when we say this, we talk about like role models and things like that. And I didn't have a lot of role models because when you grow up in a community like that there's not a lot of role models. There's not a lot of self-actualized people who are moving socioeconomically. But I remember watching the show Family Ties with Michael J. Fox. And I remember seeing him as this young, ambitious guy who was going to go out and make a lot of money. And I remember modeling him, thinking, this is the way to do it. He was going to major in economics. I majored in economics. He always dressed really nice. I tried to dress as nice as I could. I didn't have any money for clothes, but I always try and get the nicest clothes that I could afford. And then that's worse than when you're in a upper lower class or lower middle class environment. I was a mile from the city line of Baltimore City. You look like that, you're going to get picked on quite a bit. And that was really something that I had to struggle with as well. Not only just the outward appearance, but the mindset that you want to get out. Like, people can pick up on that. And that caused a lot of friction, I think. I had a lot of problems with bullies growing up. I had a lot of those kinds of issues, really, because I was really trying to better myself and get out of the place. And I think that caused me a lot of trouble, both internally and with the world around me. The path out that I saw for me was education. Fortunately, the University of Maryland was right up the street from my grandmother's house. So I would drive past the University of Maryland at College Park sometimes when I go visit her, and I would see it was the most beautiful campus you could ever imagine. And for me, my eyes would light up. But there were struggles because I would drive by that campus. My grades weren't that good. My father would give me a hard time and he'd say, you're not smart enough to go. I remember the first time he said this, he said, would you like to go to University of Maryland? I said, yeah, Dad, I think I would. He goes, so you're not smart enough to go here. And I remember that, like, that was a burn. And it was, I'll show you, like, cue Rocky Balboa montage. That was really, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do better. But it cut. And then other things that happened to me as a kid growing up. But how did that strengthen my resolve? I look back now, Steve Jobs said this, that you can't connect the dots of your life looking forward, but you sure can connect them looking back. And I believe that, much like King David in the Bible, he fought Goliath. The story is so great when he talks about taking on Goliath, because what he says to King Saul is, Saul's, hey man, this guy's going to kick your butt. And David says, look, I took out the bear. I took out the lion. This guy's nothing. And I really as I realized as things went forward, all of the struggles and just the hundreds and hundreds of struggles, big and small, really prepared me for the business I have today, where we've got 200 employees. And if you're thinking that 200 employees is easier than 10 employees, forget it. There's an exponential increase in the number of problems every additional employee that you add. So to be able to run an organization with 200 people, it takes tremendous fortitude. Another King David story, there was a time in the Bible where David his village had gotten raided. His men were turning on him and they're saying, let's kill him. Let's kill King David. And David didn't have the plan yet on what to do. To think that David could persevere as a leader in a time when his followers wanted to kill him. But because of what he went through up until that point, it had prepared him for that. There are times when we've been through major crises in my organization and people may doubt our leadership. In fact, we lose some people, but I can always make the commitment. We're going to keep all of you guys employed. We're going to get through this. I know we will because I've been through it before. And even when they turn on me, I still know I got to keep moving forward. Even if they start questioning my judgment, I know I've got to move for the victory. I cannot wait and worry about other people's opinions in times of crisis. So those are two great examples of King David in the Bible. I love him. He's a great character, great stories. So there were two real paths that were available to me as a child. And one path was, basically striking out on my own, defying what everybody said about me. And when I say everybody, I'm not just talking about my parents. My high school guidance counselor said I should go to a trade school. I shouldn't even apply to college. My grades weren't that great. Thankfully, I did really well on the SAT with no prep class or anything. We didn't know about prep classes where I grew up. And so I did well enough to get into the University of Maryland, which was my first step out into the real world. But there were two paths for me to follow. One was the path of basically giving up. And that's actually the path my sister took, unfortunately. And my sister got into heroin addiction. She started with alcohol and then ended up with heroin addiction at the age of 19. She was full blown out heroin addict, really probably earlier, 18, maybe 17. It was really affecting the family at that age. And for me, I always thought, you know what, I've just got to get out of here. So what was the difference? I'll be honest with you, I don't know what the difference is. My sister was more talented. She was more intelligent. She had lower self-esteem, maybe. That was one thing I noticed because my sister at a very young age started lying a little bit. And so that was her path to be able to get what she needed, is by lying. And that really took off as she got into the drug addiction. For me, I came up with my own rules. And for me to survive and to maintain my self-worth, I have to have my own rules and live by my own set of standards. And honestly, I don't know, but I do know that the crises of my youth shaped me into the person I am today. And I do see this as a pattern among many successful people, is most of them have had some kind of trauma when they were growing up, be it divorce or family instability or financial crisis or any of those kinds of the big ones that we know about. Many of them have been through that. Steve Jobs, for example, was adopted, right? That's not really a crisis, but that's an identity. If you look back, and a lot of the greats, they've grown up in some pretty tragic circumstances and they just made a decision at some point, I'm better than this. Because you go up or down, that's it. You're either growing or you're dying. There is no third direction. That's from that movie, Tommy Boy. You're either growing or you're dying. There's no third direction. So you choose growth or you choose to not grow, and that really means death. At a young age, I did watch a fair amount of TV because that was what was available to us. I didn't have a lot of books. My father did read a lot, but I was not a real reader until I got into college. That's where my love of reading really took off. So at that age, it was really mostly looking at watching TV and seeing certain role models on TV and what I thought would be interesting. I role played Dungeons and Dragons and did those things, made me use my imagination a lot. Like I could dream that I could be a different character and somebody different, somebody extraordinary. I think that helped develop my imagination and the idea that I can change my life through my imagination and work. But I didn't really have any role models at a young age, not any strong role models. I had good people around me, but I wouldn't say there was anybody like, I'm going to be like Jeff Bezos or I'm going to be like Elon Musk. I didn't have any of those guys. Maybe superheroes, that kind of thing. I like Superman because I had hair like his to try and help people. I had a vision. I wanted to help people. But besides that, it was really by luck. And I didn't really get going with that until well into college or even law school, where I started saying, hey, this is the actual path that I can have to what I believe are the great goals for my life. I fell backwards in being a lawyer. I didn't really know any lawyers at the time. The lawyers I did see, I thought they weren't like me. I didn't see myself being like a lawyer, but people around me said I should be a lawyer because I was argumentative. I liked to debate. And that was the perception of what a lawyer would be. And then after I got into college, I didn't really have a plan outside of after college. I was going to go into sales. I'd been a salesman in college, door-to-door salesman in college and before college. I'd selling things door to door. And I figured if I could do that, I can sell anything. So I wanted to be a salesman. I thought that was a path for financial success. Didn't understand corporate structures. I didn't understand being an entrepreneur. I didn't understand any of that stuff, just how to make money. And I decided, I started dating a girl who wanted to go to law school. And she says, you should go to law school. And I was a senior in college. I hadn't really prepared for it. I had had a rough start in college. So my grades, again, weren't that great. But I applied and I didn't get in the first year, but I really committed to going to law school at that point because I saw that as a very clear path. It developed in my mind. I did get a job as a salesman. I didn't like it as much as I thought I would. So I said, hey, listen, this law path might be good for me. I got in law school. Once I got in law school, I was like a fish in water. I just blew up in law school. I thought this was great. I liked the classes. It was a tremendous amount of work. But by that point, I had conditioned myself so much to be able to work really hard, 60, 70 hours a week. Law school, I wouldn't say it was easy for me, but it was definitely the right step. And it stimulated me intellectually. It gave me the kind of the prestige I was looking for. Lawyers were well respected. It seemed like it'd be a good path for me to have the path out of where I was. I was still in Baltimore where my parents were, but I was at least could see the path out of that environment. Hey, so if you like today's video, share, like, and subscribe.